The dust hung thick in the afternoon air of Marysville, Kansas, when Quincy Xander first saw her teaching those children beneath the sprawling cottonwood tree, and something in his chest shifted in a way he had never experienced during all his 26 years of living. The sight stopped him mid-stride on the dusty Main Street, his horse's reins loose in his calloused hands as he watched the young woman gesture animatedly, her dark hair catching the late September sunlight of 1878. She sat on a weathered tree stump with 7 children arranged on the ground before her, their faces upturned with rapt attention as she held a battered book and pointed to words he could not see from this distance. Quincy had ridden into town that morning seeking work at one of the ranches outside Marysville, not expecting anything beyond a hot meal and maybe a bed that did not involve sleeping under stars. He had been drifting since the spring, moving from town to town across Kansas and Nebraska, taking jobs where he could find them, never staying long enough to put down roots. The war had ended when he was just a boy, but the restlessness it had planted in men's souls seemed to have infected his generation too, even though they had not fought in it themselves. He was tired of drifting, though he had not admitted it to himself until this very moment, watching this woman teach children in the open air because apparently Marysville had no schoolhouse. "That is Miss Georgiana Zimmerman," a voice said beside him, and Quincy turned to see an older man with a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest. The lawman's eyes were kind but assessing, taking Quincy's measure the way all sheriffs did when a stranger rode into their town. "She arrived here 3 months ago from Pennsylvania, full of ideas about educating the children. Town cannot afford to build her a proper school, so she makes do with what the good Lord provided." Quincy found his voice, though it came out rougher than he intended. "That seems a hard way to teach, exposed to weather and all." The sheriff nodded, his expression growing troubled. "It is. Come winter, I do not know what she will do. The mercantile owner lets her use his back room when it rains, but it is cramped and dark. She deserves better, and so do those children. But times are hard, and the town council says there is no money for a schoolhouse. We have been trying to raise funds, but it is slow going." The woman beneath the tree stood then, smoothing her simple brown skirt, and began walking among the children, pausing to look at something one of them had written on a small slate. Her smile was radiant when she praised the child, and Quincy felt that strange shifting in his chest again, like something long dormant was waking up. "I am a carpenter," Quincy heard himself say, though he had not planned to speak the words. "Among other things, I could build her a schoolhouse." The sheriff's eyebrows rose. "That would take considerable time and materials, son. You have that kind of commitment in you." Quincy watched as Georgiana knelt beside a small girl who seemed frustrated with her lesson, speaking softly until the child's face brightened. "I think maybe I do," he said quietly. That evening, Quincy found himself standing awkwardly at the edge of the clearing beneath the cottonwood tree, hat in hands, waiting as Georgiana dismissed the last of her students. She had noticed him there for the past 10 minutes, but had not acknowledged his presence until the children had scattered toward their homes, their cheerful voices fading into the evening air. Now she turned to face him fully, and he saw that her eyes were a striking green that reminded him of new grass in spring. "May I help you, sir?" Her voice was crisp, educated, with the faintest trace of an Eastern accent. She held herself with confidence, but her hand rested on the thick book she carried, as if it were both shield and weapon. "My name is Quincy Xander, madam. I am a carpenter by trade, and I would like to build you a schoolhouse." The words hung in the air between them. Georgiana's expression shifted from polite wariness to surprise, then to something that might have been hope before she shuddered it away. "That is very kind, Mr. Xander, but the town has no funds for such a project. I have already discussed this matter extensively with the town council. I am not asking the town for money, Quincy said, meeting her eyes. I have some savings, and I can work other jobs to earn what I need for materials. I just need your permission to build on land near where you teach, and maybe someone to tell me where I can find reasonable timber. Georgiana studied him for a long moment, and Quincy felt as if she could see straight through to whatever was left of his soul. Why would you do this? You do not know me. You do not know these children. It was a fair question, and Quincy found himself struggling for an answer that made sense. I have been drifting for a long time, madam. Maybe I am tired of moving without purpose. Building something that matters, something that will help children learn, that seems like purpose enough. She tilted her head slightly, still assessing him. You understand this would take weeks, perhaps months. Winter comes early in Kansas. Then I had better start soon. A small smile touched the corners of her mouth, and Quincy felt his heart do something complicated. The land beneath this tree belongs to Mrs. Martha Henley. She is a widow who owns considerable property around here. If you can gain her permission, Mr. Xander, then you have mine as well. But I warn you, Mrs. Henley is not easily convinced of anything. Quincy replaced his hat on his head and allowed himself a slight smile. Then I suppose I will have to be persuasive. Mrs. Martha Henley turned out to be a formidable woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and eyes that could cut through pretense like a hot knife through butter. She received Quincy in the parlor of her substantial house on the edge of town, listening without expression as he explained his proposal. "Young man," she said when he had finished, "I have seen many drifters come through Marysville with grand ideas and empty promises. What makes you different?" Quincy met her gaze steadily. "Nothing, madam, except my word. I give you my word that I will build Miss Zimmerman a proper schoolhouse on your land, and I will do it right. If I fail or abandon the project, you can run me out of town yourself, Mrs." Henley's lips twitched with what might have been amusement. "I like Miss Zimmerman. She has spirit and dedication. Those children need education if they are going to make something of themselves. Very well, Mr. Xander. You have my permission to build on the acre surrounding that cottonwood tree. But I will be watching your progress. I would expect nothing less, madam." As Quincy stood to leave, Mrs. Henley added, "There is a lumber mill 15 miles west. The owner, Jacob Sterling, is a fair man. Tell him I sent you and he will give you honest prices. For anything else you need, the Marysville Mercantile can order supplies, though it takes time." Quincy spent the next 2 days planning. He had learned carpentry from his father before the older man had died of pneumonia 5 years ago, and he had worked on enough buildings across Kansas and Nebraska to know what he was doing. He sketched rough plans in a battered notebook, calculating materials and costs, figuring how to make his savings stretch far enough. A simple one-room schoolhouse, 20 feet by 30 feet, with a good wood stove for heating, proper windows for light, and a sturdy roof that would not leak. Nothing fancy, but solid and well built. On the 3rd day, he rode out to Sterling's lumber mill and placed his first order. Jacob Sterling was indeed a fair man, and when Quincy explained the project, the mill owner knocked 10% off his prices. "Marysville needs a school," Sterling said. "My own grandchildren learn under that tree. This is good work you are doing." Quincy started clearing and leveling the ground beside the cottonwood tree on a crisp October morning, and Georgiana watched him from where she taught her lessons. The children were curious about the tall cowboy with the quiet manner and strong hands, asking their teacher questions she could not fully answer. "Is he really building us a school, Miss Zimmerman?" "He says he is, Thomas. We will have to wait and see." But as the days passed and Quincy appeared each morning without fail, Working from dawn until the light faded, Georgiana began to believe it might actually happen. He laid a proper foundation with stones hauled from a nearby creek, working with a precision that spoke of genuine skill. When the first wagon load of lumber arrived from Sterling's mill, the children cheered, and Quincy looked up from his work with a genuine smile that transformed his usually serious face. Georgiana found herself watching him more than she should, noticing the way he moved with efficient grace, the way he treated the materials with respect, the way he sometimes paused to wipe sweat from his brow and gaze at his progress with quiet satisfaction. She had been courted before, back in Philadelphia, by young men who spoke pretty words and made grand promises. They had all disappeared when she announced her intention to go west and teach in frontier towns that desperately needed educators. Quincy Xander made no pretty speeches, and no promises beyond the one to build her school. Yet his actions spoke louder than any words those Philadelphia suitors had ever managed. 2 weeks into the project, Georgiana brought Quincy a jar of cool water and some cornbread wrapped in cloth during the noon hour when she dismissed the children for their lunch break. He was measuring wood for the frame, his shirt damp with honest sweat despite the cooling October air. "You should eat something, Mr. Xander," she said, holding out the simple offering. He looked surprised but accepted with a nod of thanks. "That is kind of you, Miss Zimmerman, and please call me Quincy. Mr. Xander was my father." "Then you must call me Georgiana, at least when the children are not present." She settled on a nearby stump, arranging her skirts. "May I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why are you really doing this? And please do not tell me it is simply about finding purpose." Men do not append their lives and spend their savings on strangers for such abstract reasons. Quincy took a long drink of water before answering, his eyes on the partially constructed frame before him. "I saw you teaching those children, and something in me recognized something in you. I cannot explain it better than that. You could have stayed east where life is easier, where there are established schools and society and all the comforts civilization offers. But you came out here to teach children who might otherwise grow up unable to read or write. That takes a kind of courage I admire." Georgiana felt warmth rise in her cheeks. "It is not courage, it is simply what needed to be done." "That is exactly what makes it courage." He met her eyes then, and the directness of his gaze made her breath catch. "I have been drifting because I did not know what I was looking for. Maybe I still do not know entirely. But building this school, watching you teach, it feels like I am finally moving towards something instead of just away from things." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the Kansas wind rustling through the cottonwood leaves above them. Georgiana found herself wanting to know everything about this quiet man who had appeared in her life, like an answer to a prayer she had not known she was praying. "Where are you from originally, Quincy?" "Ohio, though my family moved to Kansas when I was young. My father worked as a carpenter and taught me the trade. After he died, I could not stay in one place. Everything reminded me of him." He broke off a piece of the cornbread, examining it before taking a bite. "This is very good. I cannot take credit. Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house made it. She is a wonderful cook." Georgiana paused. "I am from Philadelphia. My father is a banker and my mother comes from old money. They were horrified when I announced I was going west to teach. But you came anyway." "But I came anyway," she confirmed. "I read about the desperate need for teachers in frontier towns and I could not ignore it. What is the point of my education if I hoard it in some comfortable parlor, teaching only wealthy children who already have every advantage?" Quincy smiled at her, a real smile that reached his eyes and made him look younger. "You are a remarkable woman, Georgiana Zimmerman." Before she could respond, the children began returning from their lunch break, chattering and laughing. Georgiana stood, smoothing her skirts, suddenly feeling flustered in a way she had not experienced since she was a schoolgirl herself. "I should return to my lessons," she said. "And I should return to my building," Quincy replied, standing as well. "Thank you for the meal." As October deepened and the first frosts touched the prairie grasses, the schoolhouse began to take real shape. Quincy worked with steady determination, and word of his project spread through Marysville. Other men began stopping by after their own work was done, offering an hour or two of assistance. The blacksmith helped with the iron hardware. The mercantile owner donated glass for the windows it cost. Even Sheriff Morrison spent an afternoon helping to raise the heavy roof beams. Georgiana watched this community effort with tears in her eyes, touched by the way people came together for something that mattered. And always at the center of it was Quincy, directing the work with quiet authority, thanking each person who contributed, working longer hours than anyone else. She had begun timing her lessons so she could spend a few minutes talking with Quincy during the children's breaks. These conversations became the highlights of her days. She learned that he loved horses and hoped to have a small ranch of his own someday. That he could read but not well, having had limited schooling as a child. That his favorite time of day was dawn, when the world felt full of possibility. That he had a dry sense of humor that caught her by surprise and made her laugh. In turn, she told him about her love of books, her dreams of starting a lending library once the school was established, her complicated feelings about the family she had left behind in Philadelphia. She admitted that she sometimes felt lonely in Marysville, that the other unmarried women in town viewed her with suspicion, thinking she put on airs because of her education. "They are probably jealous," Quincy said one afternoon in late October. They were sitting on the schoolhouse steps, which he had just finished building. The structure now had walls and a roof, and Quincy was working on the interior details. "You are doing something important and unconventional. That makes small-minded people uncomfortable." "I do not think they are small-minded, just different from me. They cannot understand why I would choose this life when I could have had an easier one." "Can you understand why they make the choices they make?" Georgiana considered this. "I suppose not entirely, no. Then maybe you are even. Different does not have to mean better or worse." She looked at him with new appreciation. "You are wiser than you give yourself credit for, Quincy Xander." He ducked his head, embarrassed. "I just pay attention to people. My mother used to say that was worth more than book learning, though I think she was wrong about that. Books teach you things no amount of observing can." "I could teach you," Georgiana said impulsively. "To read better, I mean, if you wanted." Quincy's head came up, surprise and something else flickering across his face. "You would do that, of course. You are building me a schoolhouse. The least I can do is help you improve your reading." So they began meeting 3 evenings a week after Georgiana had finished her lesson planning for the next day. Quincy would arrive at her boarding house, hat in hand, and they would sit in Mrs. Patterson's parlor with books spread between them. Georgiana was a patient teacher, never making him feel foolish when he stumbled over difficult words, encouraging his progress with genuine warmth. Mrs. Patterson, a widow in her 50s who had seen her share of frontier romances, watched these sessions with knowing eyes but said nothing. She simply made sure to bring them tea and occasionally some fresh baked goods, leaving the parlor door properly open while giving them enough privacy to talk freely. November arrived with bitter winds and the constant threat of snow. Quincy worked even longer hours, desperate to finish the schoolhouse before winter made construction impossible. His hands grew rough and cracked from the cold and labor. Georgiana noticed and began bringing him a tin of salve her mother had sent from Philadelphia. You need to take care of yourself, she scolded gently one evening when he arrived for his reading lesson with hands that were raw and bleeding slightly. I need to finish your school, he countered, but he let her apply the salve, sitting still as she worked it into his damaged skin with gentle fingers. The intimacy of the moment struck them both. Georgiana's hands stilled, cradling his larger, rougher ones in her own. Quincy's breath caught audibly. They looked up at the same moment, their faces close, and something passed between them that was beyond words. "Georgiana," Quincy said, his voice rough with emotion. "I need you to know that I did not build this school, just to win your favor. I did it because it was right. But somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you, and I needed to say that honestly before we go any further." Georgiana's heart hammered in her chest. "Quincy, I have been falling in love with you since the day you promised to build this school and actually kept your word. You are the most honorable man I have ever met. I am just a drifter with calloused hands and limited prospects. You are a man who builds schools for children he does not know, who works until his hands bleed, who shows up every evening wanting to learn despite being exhausted. You are a man of integrity and kindness and quiet strength." Her eyes shone with unshed tears. "Do you really not see how extraordinary that is?" Quincy reached up with one salve-covered hand to gently cup her cheek. "May I kiss you, Georgiana?" "Yes," she whispered. The kiss was gentle and tentative at first, both of them almost shy despite the feelings burning between them. Then Quincy's arm came around her waist and Georgiana's hands slid up to his shoulders, and the kiss deepened into something that spoke of loneliness ending, of finding home in another person, of promises yet to be made. When they finally drew apart, both breathing hard, Mrs. Patterson cleared her throat loudly from the doorway. "I think perhaps that is enough reading lessons for this evening," she said with poorly concealed amusement. "Mr. Xander, you should go before the neighbors talk. Miss Zimmerman, we need to discuss proper courtship protocols." They separated reluctantly, but Quincy's eyes held promises as he bid them good night. After he left, Mrs. Patterson sat Georgiana down with a cup of tea and a knowing smile. "That young man is going to marry you, you know," she said. "We have only just admitted our feelings," Georgiana protested, though her heart leaped at the thought. "He has been building you a schoolhouse for 2 months. That is a declaration more solid than any words, and the way you look at him, child, well, I was young and in love once too. I recognize the signs." Georgiana could not help but smile. "He is wonderful, is he not? He is good and honest and hard-working. Those are rare qualities in any man. If he asks you to marry him, I hope you have the sense to say yes." The schoolhouse was completed on a gray day in mid-November, just before the first real snow began to fall. Quincy installed the final desk that morning, part of a set that various townspeople had contributed or built themselves. The wood stove stood ready, its chimney properly fitted. The windows gleamed. The floor was smooth and level. It was simple and unadorned, but it was solid and warm and perfect. Georgiana stood in the center of the room, turning slowly to take it all in. Tears streamed down her face unchecked. "It is beautiful," she whispered. Quincy stood in the doorway, exhausted but satisfied. "It is yours and the children's." She walked to him, not caring who might see, and took his hands in hers. "How can I ever thank you for this? Marry me," he said simply. Georgiana's breath caught. "What? Marry me, Georgiana? I know I do not have much. I spent most of my savings on this school, and I will need to work hard to build up again. But I love you more than I knew it was possible to love anyone, and I want to spend my life making you happy. I will work any job, do whatever it takes to provide for you. I will support your teaching and help with your lending library dream and be there every single day. Just say yes." Yes, Georgiana said, laughing and crying at once. Yes, Quincy, of course, yes. I do not need wealth or grand gestures. I just need you exactly as you are. He swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around in the empty schoolhouse while she laughed with pure joy. When he set her down, they kissed again, longer and deeper, sealing their promise to each other. The wedding took place 3 weeks later in early December, in the very schoolhouse Quincy had built. The whole town turned out for the celebration. Mrs. Henley gifted them a section of her land, 20 acres where they could build a home and maybe start that small ranch Quincy dreamed of. Sheriff Morrison stood up as Quincy's best man. Mrs. Patterson cried happy tears throughout the ceremony. The children from Georgiana's class scattered dried wildflower petals they had saved from autumn. Georgiana wore a simple dress of deep blue that brought out her eyes, with her dark hair arranged in soft curls. Quincy wore his best suit, borrowed from the mercantile owner, and looked uncomfortable but deeply happy. When the circuit preacher asked if they took each other as husband and wife, their "I do" rang out clear and certain. They spent their wedding night at the boarding house in a room Mrs. Patterson had decorated with candles and wildflowers. Quincy was gentle and reverent, treating Georgiana like something precious. She was nervous but eager, trusting him completely. Their union was tender and passionate, a physical expression of the love that had grown between them over months of working side by side toward a common goal. Afterward, lying in Quincy's arms with her head on his chest, Georgiana said, "I cannot believe you came into my life. Sometimes I think I dreamed you." "I am real," he promised, kissing the top of her head, "and I am yours for as long as we both live." Winter came in full force, but Georgiana's students now learned in warmth and comfort. The schoolhouse became the heart of the community, used for town meetings and social gatherings as well as education. Georgiana threw herself into teaching with renewed energy, and her students flourished. Quincy found work at one of the larger ranches outside town, proving himself valuable with his carpentry skills and his way with horses. The ranch owner, impressed by his character and dedication, made him a foreman within months. The pay was good, and Quincy began saving again, this time toward building a house on the land Mrs. Henley had given them. They lived with Mrs. Patterson through that first winter, but as spring approached, Quincy began working on their house every spare moment he had. This time he had help from the start, as the men of Marysville insisted on contributing labor to the man who had built their school. The house rose quickly, a simple but sturdy structure with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a parlor. Georgiana planted a garden and helped with the interior finishing, hanging curtains she had sewn herself, and arranging the modest furniture they had accumulated. When they finally moved in on a warm day in May of 1879, 8 months after Quincy had first seen her teaching beneath the cottonwood tree, it felt like coming home. That first night in their own house, they made love in their own bed and talked late into the night about their dreams. Quincy wanted to expand their land, raise horses, maybe take on apprentices to teach carpentry the way his father had taught him. Georgiana wanted to expand her school, bring in more books, eventually hire another teacher so they could offer more advanced education. "I want children too," Georgiana said softly, her hand over Quincy's heart. "Your children." "Our children," he corrected, covering her hand with his. "I want that too, a house full of them if we are blessed." Their first child came in the spring of 1880, a healthy boy with Quincy's serious eyes and Georgiana's dark hair. They named him James after Quincy's father, and the baby was welcomed with joy by the entire town. Georgiana took a brief break from teaching, but Mrs. Patterson and several other women looked after James so she could return to her students within a few months. Quincy proved to be a devoted father, often carrying James in a sling as he worked around their growing property. He was building a stable now, preparing to buy their first breeding horses. The ranch owner had given him a generous bonus and helped him make connections with reputable horse traders. Life settled into a rhythm of work and love and community. Georgiana's school continued to thrive, and she began her lending library, starting with books donated from her family in Philadelphia and from various townspeople. The library occupied 2 shelves in the schoolhouse, but it was a beginning. In 1882, their second child arrived, a daughter they named Margaret after Georgiana's mother. This birth was harder than the first, and for a few frightening hours, Quincy feared he might lose his wife. But Georgiana was strong, and with the help of the town's midwife and doctor, she came through safely. "No more," Quincy said fiercely, holding his exhausted wife's hand as their newborn daughter nursed. "I cannot risk losing you." But Georgiana smiled weakly. "We will see what God decides." "I am fine, Quincy. Frightened you, did I? 10 years off my life at least." She squeezed his hand. "Good thing we have many years ahead of us then." By 1884, their horse breeding operation was successful enough that Quincy could hire 2 hands to help with the work. He had proven to have his father's eye for quality and craftsmanship, but with horses instead of wood. Their stock was known throughout the region for soundness and good temperament. Georgiana had hired a young assistant teacher, a woman named Sarah who had studied at a normal school in Missouri. Together, they educated nearly 20 children now, as Marysville continued to grow. The lending library had expanded to an entire wall of shelves, and there was talk of eventually building a separate library building. Their third child, another boy they named Thomas, arrived in 1885 with far less drama than Margaret's birth. He was a quiet baby who rarely cried, observing the world with solemn attention that reminded everyone of his father. Through it all, Quincy and Georgiana's love deepened and matured. They had the occasional disagreement, as all couples did, but they had learned to talk through their differences with honesty and respect. Quincy supported Georgiana's teaching completely, often helping her grade papers in the evening or listening as she worked through lesson plans. Georgiana took genuine interest in the horse breeding operation, learning to judge horseflesh and sometimes accompanying Quincy to sales and auctions. In 1887, when James was 7, Margaret 5, and Thomas 2, Georgiana discovered she was pregnant again. This time she was more cautious, taking things easier, and Quincy hovered protectively though he tried not to smother her. Their fourth child, a daughter named Catherine, was born in early 1888 during a spring thunderstorm. She came into the world wailing lustily, and the midwife laughed. "This one has spirit," she declared, and it proved true. Catherine was fearless and adventurous from her earliest days. The years passed with the sweet swiftness of a happy life. The children grew healthy and strong. James showed his father's aptitude for building and working with his hands, often following Quincy around and imitating his work. Margaret was bookish like her mother, always with her nose in a story. Thomas loved the horses and could gentle the most skittish foal with patience and soft words. Catherine was the wild one, climbing trees and racing her brothers and keeping everyone on their toes. Georgiana continued teaching until 1890, when the school board finally had enough funding to hire 2 full-time teachers and build an addition to the schoolhouse. On her last day, the community held a celebration honoring her 12 years of service. The current teacher, Sarah, presented her with a leather-bound book containing notes of thanks from every student Georgiana had ever taught. "You changed this town," Sarah said during the ceremony. "You gave these children the gift of education, and through them, you shaped our future." Georgiana, now 34 years old, stood with Quincy's arm around her waist and looked out at the faces of her students, former students and neighbors. "I only did what needed doing," she said, echoing words she had spoken to Quincy so many years ago. "But I could not have done any of it without my husband, who built this schoolhouse with his own hands and his own money when no one else would. He showed me what real dedication looks like." Quincy, 38 now, with the first threads of silver in his dark hair, ducked his head in his familiar gesture of embarrassment. But his eyes were bright with pride and love. That night, alone in their bedroom while the children slept, Georgiana said, "I am ready for the next chapter now. The school is in good hands. I want to focus on our family, maybe finally write that book I have always talked about. The one about frontier education. Yes, I have 12 years of experiences and observations. It feels important to record them." Quincy pulled her close. "Then you should do it. You have my full support always." She kissed him softly. "I know. You have supported every dream I have ever had. How did I get so lucky? I am the lucky one. You made a drifting cowboy into a man with purpose and a family and a home. You are everything, Georgiana." Their life continued its steady, happy course. The children grew and flourished. James, at 14, was already helping significantly with the horse operation and showing real business sense. Margaret, 12, was a voracious reader who talked about becoming a teacher like her mother. Thomas, 10, had a gift with animals that went beyond just horses. Catherine, 8, was still wild and fearless, but also fiercely loyal and kind-hearted. In 1895, when Georgiana was 39 and Quincy 43, they welcomed their fifth and final child, a son they named Samuel. This pregnancy had been unexpected but welcomed, and the birth was mercifully easy. Samuel was a happy, sunny baby who brought joy to the entire family. By 1898, the Xander Ranch was one of the most respected horse breeding operations in Kansas. Quincy employed 6 hands and had expanded their land holdings to nearly 200 acres. He had also taken on 2 apprentice carpenters over the years, teaching them the trade his father had taught him, ensuring those skills passed to another generation. Georgiana had indeed written her book, a detailed account of frontier education that was published by a Boston firm and received surprising acclaim. She donated the royalties to establish a scholarship fund for Kansas children seeking teacher training. She also served on the school board and continued to run the lending library, which had finally gotten its own building in 1896. Their children were growing into fine young people. James, 21 now, was being courted by the daughter of a neighboring rancher and talking about marriage. Margaret, 19, had enrolled in a normal school and would begin teaching in a nearby town the following year. Thomas, 17, worked alongside his father and was already known as one of the best horse trainers in the region. Catherine, 15, was still adventurous but channeling it into learning everything she could about ranch management. Samuel, 3, was the beloved baby of the family, adored by his older siblings. On an evening in late summer of 1899, Quincy and Georgiana sat on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over their land. 21 years had passed since Quincy had first seen her teaching under that cottonwood tree. They were older now, with gray in their hair and lines on their faces, but their love had only grown stronger with time and experience. "You ever regret it?" Quincy asked, his hand finding hers the way it always did. "Giving up the society life in Philadelphia, the easier path?" Georgiana laughed. "Not for a single moment. This life, this family, this community we have built together, it is everything I never knew I wanted. You gave me that, Quincy. You and your crazy idea to build a schoolhouse for a woman you did not even know. I knew enough, he said. I saw you teaching those children, and I knew you were someone special, someone worth building something for. You built more than a schoolhouse. You built our entire life together. They sat in comfortable silence, fingers intertwined, as the Kansas sky turned brilliant shades of orange and pink. From inside the house came the sounds of their children, Catherine helping Samuel with something while he giggled, the familiar domestic symphony of their life together. I love you, Georgiana said softly. More now than even at the beginning, which I would not have thought possible. I love you too, Quincy replied. You are still the most remarkable woman I have ever known. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, they remained on the porch, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting. The schoolhouse Quincy had constructed still stood in town, expanded and improved, but fundamentally the same solid structure he had built with his own hands 21 years ago. It remained a testament to what love could accomplish, to what one determined person could do when they cared enough to act. Their story became part of Marysville's history, told and retold until it took on the quality of legend. The cowboy who built a schoolhouse for love. The Eastern teacher who came west and found her calling and her soulmate. Their children and eventually grandchildren grew up hearing the tale, understanding that their family had been built on a foundation of sacrifice and dedication and true partnership. In 1905, James married his rancher's daughter and gave Quincy and Georgiana their first grandchild, a boy who they named Quincy after his grandfather. Margaret married a fellow teacher and continued her educational work. Thomas took over more of the daily operations of the ranch, allowing Quincy to slow down a bit. Catherine, defying convention as always, bought land of her own and started a cattle operation that quickly proved successful. Samuel, still young at 10, showed promise of inheriting both his father's carpentry skills and his mother's love of learning. The years continued their gentle march. Quincy and Georgiana grew old together, their love a quiet constant that anchored not just their own lives but the lives of their children and grandchildren. They had built something that would last beyond their own years, a legacy of education and family and community service. In 1910, on their 30th wedding anniversary, the town of Marysville held a celebration in their honor. The current schoolhouse, much expanded from Quincy's original construction, was officially renamed the Xander School. A bronze plaque was installed commemorating Georgiana's years of service and Quincy's donation of the original building. I did not donate it, Quincy protested to the mayor during the ceremony. I built it for Georgiana. Exactly, the mayor replied with a smile. You built it for love, and the whole town benefited. That is the best kind of donation. Georgiana, now 54 and Quincy 58, stood together before the plaque with their 5 children and 8 grandchildren surrounding them. They held hands the way they always had, fingers intertwined, two people who had found completion in each other. What are you thinking? Quincy murmured to his wife as the crowd celebrated around them. That I am grateful, she replied, for every moment, every choice that led us to each other. For that day you decided to build me a schoolhouse instead of just riding on through town. For every day since. Best decision I ever made, Quincy said firmly. As they grew older still, their children grown and scattered but still close, their grandchildren multiplying, Quincy and Georgiana remained deeply connected. They had their health, their home, their love. Quincy worked less now, content to advise Thomas and the ranch hands rather than do heavy labor himself. Georgiana wrote letters to her extensive network of fellow educators and continued to read voraciously, now with grandchildren on her lap. In the evenings, they still sat on their porch, watching sunsets over land they had made their own through years of work and care. They talked about everything and nothing, comfortable in the companionship of 3 decades together. Sometimes they did not talk at all, simply existing in each other's presence, the silence warm and full. On a warm evening in June of 1915, 37 years after Quincy had first seen Georgiana teaching under the cottonwood tree, they sat together watching their great-grandchildren play in the yard. Quincy was 63 now, his hair silver, his hands gnarled from years of work, but still strong. Georgiana was 59, her dark hair streaked with white, her face lined but still beautiful to him. "We did well," Quincy said, watching the children. "Look at what we built." Georgiana followed his gaze, taking in the scene before them. Their 5 children, all successful and happy in their own ways. Their grandchildren, healthy and loved. Their great-grandchildren, the newest generation carrying their legacy forward. The ranch, prosperous and well-run. The town of Marysville, grown and thriving with education at its heart. "We did," she agreed. "All because you were brave enough to build a schoolhouse for a woman you barely knew. All because you were brave enough to come west and teach children who desperately needed you," he countered. She leaned her head on his shoulder and his arm came around her automatically, the gesture as natural as breathing after so many years. "I think we were both brave," she said. "And we were both lucky to find each other." "Not luck," Quincy said. "Fate. You were meant to be mine and I was meant to be yours. I have believed that since the moment I saw you." They sat together as the sun set, surrounded by the evidence of their love, the family they had created, the life they had built together from nothing but determination and faith in each other. The cottonwood tree still stood in town near the schoolhouse that bore their name, and sometimes they would visit it, remembering the beginning of their story. In the years that followed, into their 70s and beyond, Quincy and Georgiana remained devoted to each other and to the family they had created. Their love story was well known throughout Kansas, an example of what could be accomplished when 2 people committed themselves to each other and to something larger than themselves. When they finally passed, within months of each other in 1925, the entire town mourned. Quincy was 73, Georgiana 69. They had lived full, rich lives of purpose and love. Their funeral service was held in the schoolhouse Quincy had built nearly 50 years earlier, now the heart of a much larger school complex, but still solid and true. Every seat was filled, and people stood along the walls and outside, paying respects to 2 people who had shaped their community in profound ways. Their 5 children, now middle-aged themselves, stood together with their own children and grandchildren, a testament to the love that had started it all. James spoke about his father's integrity and work ethic. Margaret spoke about her mother's dedication to education. Thomas spoke about how his parents had shown him what true partnership looked like. Catherine spoke about their courage and willingness to take risks for what mattered. Samuel, the youngest at 30, spoke about growing up surrounded by love and learning, about parents who had remained devoted to each other and their family until the very end. "They showed us that love is not just a feeling but a choice, made every day," Samuel said, his voice thick with emotion. They chose each other every single day for 47 years. They built not just a schoolhouse and a ranch, but a family and a legacy that will continue for generations. We honor them by living with the same integrity, the same dedication, the same love that they showed us. The Xander School continues to operate to this day, still bearing their name, still serving the children of Marysville, Kansas. The original building Quincy constructed has been preserved as a historical site, a museum dedicated to frontier education, and the remarkable love story of the cowboy who built a schoolhouse and the teacher who captured his heart. Their descendants still live in Kansas, carrying forward the values Quincy and Georgiana instilled. The ranch still operates, now run by great-great-grandchildren who learned about horses and hard work and integrity from stories about the man who started it all. Teachers in the family continue the tradition Georgiana began, understanding that education is a gift that transforms communities. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, people walking past the old cottonwood tree near the original schoolhouse swear they can see two figures sitting together in the gathering darkness. An older man with silver hair and a woman with kind eyes, holding hands and watching the sunset the way they did for so many years. Whether it is real or imagination, the vision reminds people of what Quincy and Georgiana proved, that love built on respect, dedication, and shared purpose can create something that lasts far beyond a single lifetime. Their story began with a woman teaching children under a tree and a cowboy who decided to build her a schoolhouse. It grew into a love that shaped a family, influenced a community, and left a legacy that continues to inspire. They had found each other in the vast Kansas prairie, two people searching for purpose and finding it in each other. Together, they built not just buildings but a life of meaning and love that proved stronger than time itself. In the end, that is what matters. Not the schoolhouse, though it still stands. Not the ranch, though it still thrives. But the love, constant and true, that created it all. Quincy and Georgiana Xander loved each other well and completely. And in doing so, they showed everyone around them what was possible when two people committed to building something together. Their love story, beginning in 1878 when a drifting cowboy saw a dedicated teacher and decided to stop drifting, became the foundation for generations of love, learning, and legacy that continues to this day in Marysville, Kansas, a testament to the enduring power of love and dedication.